from the 1st to the 5th. And you might have just got a pop-up button saying recording in progress. So that's just to alert you that this session will be recorded. So for people who weren't able to attend tonight are able to watch it later. All right, so let's go through some of the Zoom protocols that I'm sure everyone is already familiar with. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say, we are coming to you from Manitoba. I'm actually coming from southern Manitoba. And the conference itself is being run from Winnipeg, and we're all in Treaty 1 territory. It's the homeland of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the birthplace of the Métis Nation. So presenters, participants are located throughout Manitoba, and tonight from Ontario. So we invite you to consider the history of the land on which you're living and working, and knowing and saying the names of the Indigenous nations whose traditional territories we live on is a good first step towards reconciliation. If you want to learn more about this, please visit whos.land and native-land.ca. All right, now on to our thank yous for this conference. So we have sponsors for both the conference and on behalf of MOA as well. So we want to thank Government of Manitoba and Canadian Agricultural Partnership and Government of Canada joint grants through them, the National Farmers Union, Assiniboine Community College, ProCert, Cooperators, Prairie Fruit Growers Association, and MASC. And on behalf of MOA, we would like to thank our sponsors, the Prairie Organic Development Fund and the Canadian Organic Ingredient Strategy. Particularly this workshop is funded through the Canadian Agricultural Partnership. All right, so now on to the Zoom protocol. This is going to be an interactive session. We actually have a lot of questions that we've already got from, I'm hoping, a lot of people in the room and from gardeners around. And so we are going to be answering those questions throughout the session. However, we're also going to have a Q&A. So this is, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we'll have time for that specifically at the end of the presentations. So if you want to just look at your name, and if you want to rename yourself so we know who you are, that would be fantastic. There's 3 little dots on your button next to your face. If you want to just hit that and then rename, you can tell us who you are there. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, go ahead and do that now. And that way we can know who you are, and you can say something about you or where you're coming from as well if you want. If you have questions, you could go ahead and ask them in the chat. During our Q&A, if you want to raise your hand, turn on your video or turn on your mic, I will let you know when to ask your question. Just hit the raise hand button under reactions, and I'll point to you, and you can ask your question live if you want. All right, so I think that's all we have for Zoom protocols and all the introductions. So we're going to get on to our session. So first we have a short presentation from Catherine Carroll. She's from ProCert, and it's on the first steps of transitioning your farm to organics. Catherine's a certification specialist with ProCert Organic Systems. She works with our organic producers, gluten-free producers, aquaculture clients, and regenerative organic clients. And Catherine's been with ProCert since February, but 2021, and has been an inspector and evaluator with them since 2014. She's been in the organic industry since 2007, when she started with OPAM, which is in Manitoba, as a producer certification specialist, and then moved to a casual external evaluator, where she was working in other areas of agricultural industry. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine, and she's going to give us a short presentation on Certification 101.
Thank you. Okay, so I have to deal with my technical aspects. I know organics, I don't know computers. So, Okay, everybody can see my slide?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So I'll make sure it worked properly this time. Okay, so transitioning to organic production. I gotta move my Zoom thing around here. There we go. All right, so we're going to jump right into what is organic, and it's boring and technical. According to the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, for a product to be sent or conveyed as organic, it is required that one hold a certificate that is granted under Section 345 or 348 of the Safe Food for Canadian regulation, which basically means that you have to apply to an accredited certifying body who will verify your compliance to the Canadian standards. In this case, 32.312 for any aquaculture products and 32.310 for any food or feed. I only took a minute to mention the aquaculture because there's a lot of aquaponics that's been starting lately, so that does fall under the vegetable category. Note that these standards are freely accessible on the CFIA website and that most certifying bodies' web pages. So if you want to peruse them, go ahead. It's not an exciting read, but feel free. In addition, please be aware that when the federal standards were implemented in Manitoba, when they were implemented on the federal level, they were also adopted in Manitoba. And therefore, to identify any product as organic within the province, you must also hold organic certification under Section 345 and 348 of the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. Sorry, I have somebody knocking at my door. Anyway, sorry, we're going to have to keep going, and my person at the door is going to have to wait. So who is ProCert? ProCert is a certifying body who's accredited to the certification to the Canada Organic Regime. We're also accredited to the National Organic Program. We're approved certifying body for the Regenerative Organic Alliance recently in the last year. And we also provide additional services to the gluten-free and grass-fed program. So just to kind of give a rundown, we are overseen by the conformity verification body. I keep getting that mixed up. It's a CVB. That's what I know them as, is a CVB. So conformity verification body, that's who we answer to. They maintain our accreditation under the core. And we are required to follow the Canada Organic Regime Operating Manual on Part 13 of the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. I really just mentioned that just to give you an idea of how we're set up. This slide just to give you a visual on that one. So just to give the idea that similar to producers who have to be compliant to 32.310 and 32.312, as well as 32.311 for inputs, and that we oversee them. We have our own requirements that we have to answer to that we're overseen by the CVB. And then the CFIA oversees all of us. So not very exciting, but just to give an idea. All right, so we're going to jump right into if you want to become organic. So first of all, the Canadian Organic Standards shall be fully applied on a production unit for at least 12 months before the first harvest of organic product. Prohibited substances shall not have been used for at least 36 months before the harvest of an organic crop. So that basically means that your land must be free of prohibited substances for at least 36 months prior to the harvest, and the standard must be fully applied for 12 months, which basically corresponds right with the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, which requires that you file your application with a selected certifying body within 12 months before the day in which the food commodity is expected to be sold. Or in the case of product that is like maple products or field crops or crops that are grown in ground in a greenhouse, you actually have to apply 15 months in advance of wanting to market that product. So that date is really important to keep in mind, especially for vegetable producers. So if you're wanting to, for example, market your product July 1st of 2023, we need to see your application in April 1st of 2022. If you're looking at doing aquaponics, it has a slightly different transition period from the 12 and 15 months. They're 12 and 15 months, but most vegetable producers will be 12 months just because their production takes less than a year to get to the final market product. Another note to make too on this one is if you are taking over land that's previously certified, so if you can get a land history affidavit and a certificate from somebody who operated, say, in 2021, you can actually skip the 15-month period and apply directly and become organic right away. So some people don't realize that's an option, so I just wanted to mention that. So now I'm going to jump right into the certification process. It's a 2-year, I have done this assuming it's going to be the 2-year process with the pre-inspection. So you're going to select your certification body. You're going to fill out their application organic system plan. It could be 1 or 2 documents depending your CV. Your plan is going to include your field maps, storage maps, what you're planning to grow, what your management practices are going to be. Sorry, I'm having issues with where to put my Zoom thing. Your seed sources, your land history itself. Again, if you're taking over any certified land, that certificate, just so we can waive that 15-month period. We're going to do a preliminary evaluation when everything comes in. We're going to check your documents, make sure we have everything we need, make sure there's no obvious issues with it. Then we're going to assign it to inspector. The inspector is going to reach out to you, arrange a day and time to come and see your operation. They are going to come within the growing season. They are required to see your land when the crop is above ground, so between seeding and harvest. They're going to take a look at all your fields, your storage areas, all the paperwork you already have in place, and any potential, and discuss any paperwork they will want to see in the future. They'll review any findings with you, and then they're going to submit a report back to the office. And it's, I feel like, okay. And then it's going to go into, I think I missed, nope, we're right there. Yeah, sorry, I missed a slide there. So anyways, here's the pre-inspections, the actual inspection. And then we're going to go into the final evaluation where we're going to review any of the findings and the comments from the inspector, follow up with an additional information or notice of non-compliance or both. Don't panic if you get a notice of non-compliance. It's something common I see on farm. Everybody panics when they hear about a non-conformity. You do have 30 days to reply to any non-conformity issued by a CB. We are required to do it by core manual requirements, so we can't reduce it on you. So don't panic. You always have a chance to address anything. When everything is addressed and we're all satisfied, you're going to get your pre-inspection approval letter, and then we're all good. And we're going to move on to the next season. So next season, you're going to submit another application, the organic system plan. You won't need to do the actual contract again, just an organic system plan update as required by the Safe Food for Canadian regulations and the core standards. It could be shorter or the same length. Ours is actually a lot shorter. We'll go from a 24-page document to a 7-page document. So some people really like that second year for that simple reason. Most guys hate paperwork, and I can understand that. So your second application is going to include any updated maps if you have any additional storage or fields, if you're adding new fields, new land history for them to demonstrate the 36 months. Any inputs you plan to use that season, seed information, those various things, and any changes in your management practices. We're going to again take it into a preliminary evaluation review for anything that we may need that's missing or potential non-conformities like parallel production. When everything's addressed, we're going to move it back out to the inspector. They're going to arrange again to come back on site to do an inspection. They're going to do a tour of your fields, your bins, or wherever you're using for storage. They're going to estimate a harvest. They are required to do that because we do use it for inventory audits the following season. They're going to review any of the documents, any information they find there. They're going to review your supporting records. They're going to run a mock audit if you have inventory records already in place. Again, review all the findings, and it will come back to the office. And it'll move into final evaluation. Again, we're going to review all the comments, any findings. We're going to follow them up with any additional information or non-conformity requests. When everything's all satisfied, you get your first certificate, the main goal that you're trying to achieve. Some things to note on that is in Canada, we do certify the product, not the entity technically. So you are going to get a certificate, either a certificate in product summary or a certificate in annex, and it's going to list all the commodities that qualify as organic. If for some reason that year you don't have any products, like this year we had a few, it was a really dry season, not a lot of crops came up. It doesn't mean that you don't meet organic requirements. We just can't issue you a certificate if you don't have a commodity. So don't panic if that second year, if you still get a letter transmittal saying you're all good, but you don't get the certificate, that'll be why. So anyways, you'll get that. And then another note on that is it is an annual process. So once you get a certificate, it's not done, unfortunately. You have to put up with us annually. It's part of the safe food regulations and the, as mentioned before, the Canadian standard that you do have to submit an organic plan every year, and that we are required to come out and look at it every year. So unfortunately, there's no way around it. I know a lot of small producers try to get out, argue that they wish there was something different, but that's unfortunately out of our court. That's a CFIA thing. And then again, I wanted to remind you about the 15-month thing because it has come up a lot and I've seen huge losses on it, is that 15-month rule. If everything is good and you have no issues, unfortunately, we still cannot issue that certificate till the 15 months are up. So it's really important when you're planning to market your product on that second year to not plan to market it until after that 15 months is up. If you move it before, it is actually a non-conformity, it loses status, and unfortunately, if you've already made a contract for it, you lose all that money too. So it's really recommend to count for that when you're planning your first pre-inspection year. So then I wanted to move, because the whole process is done. That's kind of sounds simple, but it can be complicated. But anyways, I wanted to highlight some of the areas that I find are most commonly, I can't think of, anyways, most commonly find issues with. So the biggest one is record keeping. So I want the two sections that are applicable to that most commonly is 4.4.1 and 4.4.2. 4.4.1 basically summarizes that you shall maintain records that demonstrate compliance to the rest of the standards. So this includes your field activity logs from when you're cultivating the fields, when you're seeding, if you're just even monitoring it, any input applications, such things as those. And then we have 4.4.2 that a lot of people get hung up, especially the vegetable producers, is that your operation is required to have it traceable for all product coming in and all product coming out, especially find this an issue with the inventory itself. Our inspectors are required to do an inventory audit that comes down out from the CFIA through our core requirements for the certifying bodies. We have to do mass audits and trace audits. So they have to be able to go to your operation, look at your plots, and they have to be able to see how much came out and where it's gone and have it all accounted for. So that is something just really important to emphasize, especially for the vegetable side. The other area was seed that I find is a common question we get into the office. The standard is wrote in a preferential order. 5.3.1 emphasis that we do prefer to have organic seed used. However, 5.3.2 emphasizes the options if you cannot use organic seed. So you are required to demonstrate commercial availability. We like to see a minimum of 3 suppliers contacted and it wrote down and available for review. If you have determined that you cannot find an organic source of the variety and type that you want, crop type, or I guess crop type and variety, you can then pursue non-organic. You'll need to get an untreated statement from your supplier to support it's not treated with any prohibited substances. If it is treated, please be sure you get a statement indicating what it's treated with, and it's a best practice also to get the supporting input information. Because if it's something your CB hasn't seen before, they're going to have to review it for compliance, and you'd like to get that done before it goes into the ground. And then 5.3.2D specifically highlights for your seedlings, specifically for perennial stalks like your raspberry canes, strawberry roots, different things like that. If you cannot source an organic source of those, again, you can go with non-organic, but they do have a clause in here allowing for the fact that if you cannot get an untreated statement for them, they can still go into your ground. They just have to be managed organically for 12 months before you can actually market something off of them as organic. This clause hasn't really affected anybody just because most of that stock doesn't really produce anything for a couple of years anyways, but it is still there and worth mentioning. Oops, I don't know what I just did there. Sorry. All right. Okay, so then inputs. That's my second last item. A really big one to emphasize. It can really cause a headache if you mess this up. Unfortunately, really emphasize the importance that you get your inputs reviewed in advance if you're putting them in the field. Always touch base with your certifying body before you put them in. Your inputs do need to be in compliance with 32311-2020, the permitted substance list. The substance list is wrote as if it's not on the list, it's not allowed. The tables that I highlighted here, table 4.2, 7.3, and 7.4 are the ones most applicable to vegetable operations. 4.2 is where all the soil amendments and crop aids are going to be. 7.3 and 7.4 is where you're going to have your cleaner sanitizers that we will sometimes see in the handling areas. if they're washing and packaging vegetables and fruit, and also some of the utensils and things. So things to keep in mind just for the understanding of 7.3 and 7.4 for how it works. If your ingredients are on 7.3, you can get it approved without a removal event, no rinse required. So it's typically your sanitizers. If your ingredients are on just 7.4 or 7.3 and 7.4, it rules towards 7.4 and you can use it, but it has to have a removal event in place, so a water rinse. So again, highlighting there, really important, can't emphasize enough, it's that you get your inputs reviewed in advance of putting them in the field. Because if you seed something down or apply an amendment that's not approved, even though it's already in the ground, you could actually put your field right back into beginnings of transition. So, and it has happened, and it really sucks actually to have to deal with. And I really feel bad for all the producers when they enter into that. So we like to avoid seeing that. My final thing I went into was labeling of products. We tend to see this in the second year for a lot of the vegetable and fruit producers. They like to package and label the product. You've gone through the effort of trying to get certified, so you might as well get the advantage that you can use the core logo or your certifying bodies logo. These are both logos are optional for use, but you might as well take advantage of them if you can. The CBs do have to review the labels in advance, and you are required by the standard and the Safe Food for Canadian regulations to identify your products as organic. Include your certifying body. So there is a certified organic by statement that should be on there when it's identified as organic. Your product itself should be identified. Your operation should be identified as well, your contact information, as well as some kind of identification for traceability. It's good for recall and it's required by the standard. And that's about all I have on that one. Just as I guess an additional note for that is be aware that when you're wanting to apply for this, that some of the certifying bodies do have additional paperwork when you're doing this, entering this stage of your operation. For ProCert, for example, we have an Appendix B for any on-farm packaging and labeling that's occurring in an Appendix F. It is unfortunately an additional cost, but it is an additional work on our end for both the in-office and our field staff, which is our inspectors. So. But again, this is something you wouldn't have to worry about till your second year because it's not worth financially you pursuing it until you know you're going to have an organic product worth marketing. So I really rushed that one through. So anyways, that's all I have. I didn't want to take up all the time. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the ProCert office. I have the Western number, Eastern number. I have a backtrack. I have the home office number. I have the Western website, Eastern website, email. Apparently I'm done for the workday. And of course, my email's on there and then our main website. There's lots of information on there. Again, feel free to contact if you have any questions, and I promise I'm more alert during the day.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to, if there's no burning questions right now, I'm going to introduce our panel, our next panel group, and we're gonna have a few more questions for you later on, Catherine, if that's okay, and then we'll have a Q&A time for everyone a bit later. So I want to introduce a few organic growers who will field some questions, some predetermined questions we have, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A. So first of all, we've got Brendan Grant. He's from Sleepy G Farm, and he farms with his wife, Marcelle Paulin, outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario. So welcome to Manitoba, Brendan. He's got 8 acres of certified organic vegetables, and they feed 250 plus families through a CSA program that runs from July until March. He's a first generation farmer and has both struggled and benefited from having to learn each aspect of organic production on his own, and has come to realize the importance of consistent record keeping, excellent weed management, and well-timed tillage to realize success in an organic farm. All right, so next on our panel, we have Dennis Hepner, and he's coming to us from Oak Valley Vegetables in Morden, Manitoba. And he grows vegetables for the local market and organic alfalfa seed export. He's a member of the International Organic Inspectors Association and the Prairie Organic Development Fund. He's passionate about international development and makes many trips to Africa, working with agriculture, medical orphanages, and churches in Congo. And then last but not least, we have Justin Gerard from Hearts and Roots. And Justin, along with Britt Embry, stewards 30 acres of Treaty 1 territory near Eli, Manitoba. And they're the best known for their certified organic market garden. Their current interest is in cultivating a perennial foodscape for the next generation to enjoy. So welcome to all of you. So I have a bunch of questions, some I'll direct particularly, but I'm going to kind of leave it to you guys to jump into the ones you want to answer. And if no one's answering, then I'll just point to someone. If that's okay, we'll see how that goes. All right, so the first questions that we have from our previous group that wanted to know things, it was, how do you manage pests and disease in the greenhouse? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Happy to go first. I should say thanks to Catherine for doing the thankless work of going through the nitty gritty of the whatever, the write up stuff. It's not as terrifying as it sounds, and I think we'll get to that later. It sounds really impossible when you kind of read it on paper, but it's actually quite straightforward once you get into the nitty gritty. When it comes to pest management, this is I think an interesting question, because I've actually been super fortunate never to really have a significant pest pressure in my greenhouse, besides an early, maybe, or late, depending on how you look at it, invasion of flea beetles, which is managed by using protective cloth or whatever. So we use Protect Net for that. But the reason for that, I think, is, like, as much as I'd like to imagine, is because I'm such a talented grower. I'm sure luck has a lot to do with it. But at least in our area, we allow our greenhouse to freeze solid for, from November until February. We don't start the greenhouse up till March. That helps. We never bring anything in plant-wise. Everything that goes into the greenhouse is seed. So that really limits the amount of pests that you're going to bring in. Also limits the amount of disease if you're using high-quality seed. The other thing is we are pretty generous with our potting. So, like, a lot of our transplants are going into fairly sizable pots, and they're going into a living soil. So the plants have a slight advantage there. We do use river water, so not chlorinated water, not tap water, which having worked in other greenhouses, I've found, and this is just anecdotal, I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I've found that when you use chlorinated water, the plants struggle a little bit more. We put all of our inputs in the pot. I find that helps too. The plants, you're not actually having to add. Plants have everything they need to make it to the transplant, to the field stage from the get-go, and it slowly releases. And so you're not kind of reacting to nutrient deficiencies or letting plants get to that point. The other thing I was thinking about that might have something to do with it was, and I think I lost it. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good start. We'll let somebody else jump in.
I was going to mention, from an organic point of view, we're just seeing verticillium wilt coming in our tomatoes. So rotations are important in the greenhouse. So we're going to be out of tomatoes probably for 3 years now. We're going to move them out of that greenhouse, move another crop in there. But so many are in the same family as tomatoes: peppers, tomatoes, potatoes. They're all in the same family group. So yeah, it takes out a huge chunk of crop options once you see a disease pop up. Another thing for beetles, we'd use organic. You can use Trounce Pyganic for that. It's an organic product that is actually can kill them pretty good. Everything has a weakness, and for some other bugs, if you got eggplants, potato bugs will get in there, and Entrust used to work on them, but it's now become a chemistry that is not worth nothing anymore because everything's resistant to it. So that's resistance goes across the board, even if you're organic or not.
All right, Brendan, did you have anything to add to the greenhouse one? We've got a couple of questions about insects. I think we've got the insect thoughts going now. So unless you had anything on the greenhouse, Brendan, I'm going to ask a few insect questions.
Sure. Well, I think the other gentleman, everything they said is correct. I agree with. The only thing we do that we do all that stuff, but one thing we also do is we run our layer hens through each of our 3 unheated hoop houses in the early spring before we're even thinking about planting tomatoes or cucumbers. And I think that does a little bit of cleanup of some of the soil-borne insect larvae that may have managed to get through. And then Dennis mentioned a number of products, and I think the key is to have them. And you know, when you start noticing pest damage, you want to be looking at the control, not looking for it. And the one I think Dennis mentioned that you actually need, at least in Ontario, a sprayer's applicator license to access is the Pyganic. So you know, there's a bit of a process to be able to purchase that ahead of time. But and then so being ready and having the things on hand is hopefully going to keep them away. And Justin's point about keeping the plants growing really vigorously and fast and trying to get them to outgrow any pest damage that may happen. And then finally, I'll say we actually had a lot of success with something as simple as diatomaceous earth on the flanks of the hoop houses where things may crawl in. And then even dusting some crops. And diatomaceous earth has its limitations, but it actually is very effective on a number of soft-bodied insects, especially.
All right. Well, so you mentioned Pyganic, and someone else is asking, where do you get Pyganic in Winnipeg from Manitoba folk?
Probably Even Spray. They
Right.
usually carry most things, but I don't know. Dennis, do you know?
In Winkler, I can get it from Artie's Air.
All right. I missed, there was a question. Kim wanted to know if you use greenhouse, hoop house, low tunnels. I think you guys have all kind of talked about those already. So Kim, let us know if you need any more clarification on that, or if you guys wanted to answer that. Yeah,
just to be clear, I was talking mostly about growing field transplants. So for us, when we grow in hoop houses, we move them year to year. So we do the mobile tunnels. So that's another way of mitigating any sort of disease pressure.
Right. Beneficial insects, specifically parasitic wasps for aphids, are they allowed within organics? I'm seeing lots of nods. Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. The next question says, how about grasshoppers? I'm assuming that doesn't mean are they allowed in organics? How do you manage your grasshoppers?
Chickens work great on the yard. They just clean them up. They see them moving, they just dive on them like candy.
Cool.
I don't know, in the greenhouse, I haven't used chickens in greenhouse, but I'm sure they would work.
You know, I think what most people are doing, if you're really having persistent pest problems, then you have to screen in your structure, and a physical barrier is better than a chemical or biological solution. One other biological solution we've had pretty good success with on cutworms, I know that hasn't come up yet, but is beneficial nematodes. And you purchase those and dilute them and drench the plants, and it has seemed to have some good control.
Right. And Russell, sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Nope.
This is probably not going to be the most popular answer, but one way to avoid certain pests is just timing and understanding that you're not going to get away with growing things at every time of the year. And if you can figure out how to market around that, that's one way of doing it. For instance, we've never lost anything to grasshoppers before, as long as the plants are healthy and strong. And this was the first year we lost a lot of our fall seedlings just because they were still really young. And I tried to plant a little later. So had I been, 2 weeks earlier with those carrots, I wouldn't have lost the early seedlings like I did this year, because in the past I haven't. So it's, if you're careful with your records, you know which rounds make it and why too, which is really helpful.
Right. And Russell wanted to know what has replaced Entrust, if anything. Okay. All right.
Nothing. We are actually using more mechanical control. We're building a bug vac that is we do alfalfa, and we're actually last year we sucked up 200 acres, we vacuumed the fields and trying to remove them. And we're going to prototype it on our potatoes this year too, as it might do something there. We don't know yet. We're just figuring it out.
Cool. All right, and Angela would like to know, how do you get rid of thistles?
Pull them. You've got to get them
And
gone.
weeding, cultivation. The bigger operations do a lot of cover crops in their rotations, and they put it in and they actually leave it for several years to sort of choke it out and compete it. The alfalfa is a real headache to get rid of because it has really big roots, but it competes nicely with the thistle if it's there long enough. So it is an option if your vegetable operation is big enough.
We hand rogue, we got a couple 100 acres of alfalfa. We hand rogue, it's a noxious weed, so we have to get rid of it.
All right.
I found that our thistles actually got worse with aggressive tillage. When we minimized tillage, we managed to control thistles easier. They split and reproduce like crazy, and so that's when we had our greatest success. But that also meant scaling down for us. So,
did you mow them? Like, did you use the mowing at the time, right time method, or how'd you do it with the lower till?
Minimizing tillage, like we started using tarps to black places out, but also heavy cover cropping with sheep really helped. The thistles actually did poor once we did a lot of cover cropping and bringing in grazing. Having that competition really made a significant difference. And then when you went in and with the vegetables, the pressure was lower, and then you managed to keep it clean. And it was just actually about keeping really efficient rotation of maximum cover cropping once you were out with the vegetables, and not letting them regain territory. But yeah, I mean, if you're small enough, tarping is brilliant to get ahead of things, and then after that, you can kind of keep your rotation smooth and keep them out.
All right, moving on to nutrients. Did your nutrient management plan change when you transition, or after you transitioned to organics? And if so, what did you do? How did it change?
I'll say for us, it changed insofar as it got better. One of the things that's kind of required, I don't think Catherine mentioned it, but having regular soil sampling to just monitor your soils, make sure that you're not depleting them. And by virtue of doing that, it becomes pretty apparent where your deficiencies are, and then that leads you down the road of trying to fix that deficiency. But Catherine really emphasized the point of making sure that whatever you put in the soil is approved. And I go so far as to send an email to the certifying body for every input, and making sure I get it in writing that I've got the thumbs up, because I don't want to be set back 36 months. But more broadly speaking, when we certified, I became a lot more intentional about everything we do on the farm, and nutrient management is ground zero. So yeah, there's lots of good organic amendments out there. So use them.
Rotations. That's the organic farmer's best friend. And if you make friends with that theory, then it'll overcome a lot of your hiccups. And then we put manure on every 3 years. We try to be on a rotation, because you're always, I guess phosphate is always one of the more limited ones. Legumes make nitrogen, but phosphate is, haven't found a plant that makes that as well. So
I think that's a super important point that Dennis pointed out. Everybody worries about nitrogen at first because it's something that you typically are used to buying a lot of synthetically, but it's phosphorus. It can really bite you in the butt in the long run. And you can mine some of it with cover crops to an extent, but it's pretty limited. So yeah, that's a big one. Nutrient management really changes, I think, for organics, but I think Brendan pointed out that it actually, and Dennis pointed out, once you're really paying attention to it, and you hone in on your rotations and cover cropping and things like that, you get a handle on it, and you're in better shape than you were when you were just ad hoc buying what you needed at the time. And for us, I think that it was really learning about how to make it economical too, because you couldn't just go out and buy whatever you needed to a certain point. And we, I know we would get our soil tests and would recommend 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre or 110 pounds of phosphorus per acre for a garden. And, by the end of it, we were amending to 35 pounds an acre for phosphorus and nitrogen and not even putting any potassium in. So, and getting really better crops than when we started. So yeah, it can actually force your hand in a good way.
Good. There's a couple more questions. I'm not ignoring you, but I am going to go to another question. Then we're going to get to the to the ones. Brendan, I was going to ask you if you would be able to share your screen. You had a couple of slides for us about paperwork, and I was wondering if you could just share with us a little bit about record keeping, paperwork, what's involved, tips on how to do it.
Yeah. So just so our farm, we actually went down the road of certification. I think in 2014 was our first year. But prior to that, for the first, I don't know, 6 years or so, 5 or 6 years, we marketed ourselves as ecologically, ecological farmers, and we use that word. But we did eventually make the transition into being certified organic, and it wasn't because we thought that we could capture more of a premium in the marketplace, because our market really wasn't demanding that. We just felt like it was the right thing to do. And we felt like it would make us better farmers. So having said that, if anyone is kind of sitting on the fence, my words to you would be that even if you don't realize a premium in the marketplace, just by virtue of meeting the requirements of third-party organic certification is going to make your farm business more profitable. And that's done because the required records that you need in order to answer all the questions that Catherine alluded to in her presentation are going to help you analyze the of any given enterprise on your farm. So that for us has been, that's been the reason to do it. And I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay. So I don't have a presentation so much as just, I think, 4 or 5 slides to illustrate some of my words. So, organic certification is just kind of a code word for traceability. And traceability is synonymous with accountability and transparency. And these are all good things, especially when you're direct marketing your crops. At the end of the day, the documents that you need to show the inspector during their annual inspection, you essentially need to show documents that show all of the materials moving through the organic system. So that's the seeds coming onto the farm, being placed in a certain location on the farm, being harvested, and then taken off the farm in the form of a head of lettuce or whatever it may be. So we need to be able to trace it all the way through the system. And there's 4 main documents that allow an audit, a traceability audit like that, to be successful. First one is your purchasing record. So these are your invoices. If you bought seeds, they have to be certified organic. And if not, you have to show a reasonable seed search and give a reason why you weren't able to obtain an organic version or variety. The planting record. So actually having a physical record that shows where and when that crop was planted. Harvest record. This is probably the hardest one for people to maintain because the summer's busy and there's just so many things happening. But you need to be able to show when the crop was harvested and taken off. And then finally, where it went, the distribution record. None of the records that they're seeking have anything to do with financials. They don't care about the farm financials. It's really just about numbers in terms of volume of material. Now, okay, so just as an example from my own farm, this is, a really simple document. This is our planting record. So this is from this past season. So for example, if you if you look at the first entry for June 17th, the crop was beets, shows the variety. The location was an F2, which on our farm means something. And then that's pretty much all you need to know, okay? That shows the bull door beets going into a certain location on a certain date. And, you know, you also see the bed length was 400 feet and there was 3 rows to that bed. So if my invoice, my seed invoice, purchasing record, if you will, shows only a package, like a little like gardener package of Boldor beets, yet I seeded 1,200 row feet, then there may be a discrepancy and a red flag waved. Okay, as I said, the harvest record is probably the hardest one for people to get a grip on. And we struggled with it for a lot of years until I came up, and we tried digitizing, we tossed around so many ideas, having an iPad in the pack house, you know, and what it came down to is people are just really poor at doing paperwork and writing stuff down. But now we get like 100% compliance on it with our crew. We have these little harvest chits. These are little like 4x6 inch pieces of paper that we have tons of. And on it, every time that there's a harvest occurs for any crop, we have the date, the crop and variety, the block and bed, and then the numbers that are associated with the volume or how many bunches, pounds, however it is. Some of the stuff on the bottom we'll talk about later. That chit goes, you know, when you go to a restaurant and they take the order and then they put on a little spike and then it goes, you know, the kitchen pulls it and they take it. And well, we do the exact same thing. So we have a spike in the pack house. And at the end of the week, I collect all of the chits from that week. And that's all the harvest record for that week. This time of year, when it's quiet, all of those paper copy chits that are like real time get digitized into a simple spreadsheet that is, you know, then we can do our sums and totals for the inspection. Okay, I think the next thing is the other. So those are the 4 required documents. So your purchasing, your planting record, your harvest record, and then your distribution record, which, you know, if you're going to farmer's market or CSA, you just got to show where it's going to. Okay, pretty easy, but it has to be done. And then the other records that are required, you need to have a pesticide or application record. So every time you make an application to control pest, it needs to be recorded. So we just have like a separate kind of binder for that. Composting, and I saw in the chat box just a few moments ago, the compost, if it's coming out of the organic system, so you're composting yourself, then, you know, you can basically use it as you can use it raw if you want, just not on food crops that are going to be harvested within 90 days. But you need to be showing your compost log, and the compost log needs to show dates at which you've recorded the temperature, and you need to be able to verify that your compost has reached a critical threshold of 55 degrees Celsius for a prolonged period. So, and it's kind of fun to do, but it's a job. A complaints log, so if you have customers who have a complaint because they got a cucumber from you that tasted bad, you need to have a complaints log. We usually have 1 or 0 entries per year in ours. And then finally, the organic seed search record. So if you're not able to access a certain cultivar or variety because the organic option doesn't exist, then you can use it. You can use a conventional counterpart so long as it's not treated. I think this provision will probably evolve over time when the organic input side of our industry catches up to the production side. So in another decade, I would say there'll be less leniency in that way. And then finally, just to revisit the harvest chit, here's an example of one that was filled out. In the box, in the red box, this is this information that you need to collect in order to successfully navigate the traceability and the traceability exercise and the balance exercise. So date, crop, variety, location, and then the final amount. So in this case, it was 504 bunches of carrots that came out of this field. In the box in blue, this is stuff that is outside of the organic certification requirements, but it's stuff that you can very easily piggyback onto the same chore, if you will, of maintaining your records. And this is the gold for, and this is the stuff that makes your farm business more profitable if you can track things like, you know, the amount of time spent on a crop harvesting. And then in this time of year, you can evaluate the profitability a little bit better. So again, you know, in terms of improving profitability of a crop, or the planting record and the harvest record are absolutely vital. The organic certification program forces us to keep track of this information. And if we just take that extra tiny half step, we can gain valuable information that will help us evaluate our crop profitability. And you know, that part of it is something that we as farmers would not probably do on our own volition. So having the organic certifying motivation is a great thing. You know, being able to get your yields at the end of the year is very, very valuable when at this time of year you're planning for the next season. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about the required records. And as Catherine mentioned, it is a pretty comprehensive program, but Justin echoed the fact that it's actually pretty doable. And I will say from my own personal experience, we used to think that we were really good record keepers prior to being certified. And we were pretty good, but we're way, way better now. And our farm is way better off. And I always say that, you know, it's really easy to think you're doing a great job at something if there's no one there to suggest otherwise. And so when you have that audit or that inspection every summer and you start to see some deficiencies, well, these are opportunities for improvement. So that's all I have to say about that for now.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Justin or Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to add to our record keeping discussion? Or did that sort of cover it?
Oh, I think that covered it great. I think Brenda did a great job.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the farmers out there would be surprised actually how many of the records they're already keeping. And they're just not plugging them into an organic framework. And if you're not keeping those records already, like Brendan pointed out, then it's all the more reason to certify so that you do a better job of it.
So during the inspection, there's two exercises. One's the balance exercise, where the inspector is saying, okay, how many pounds of beets did you project to grow and harvest this season? And you say, okay, this much. Okay, now, and you would know that from, especially with a few years under your belt, you know what your yields are per foot or however you calculate it. Then the next question they'll ask is, okay, well, how many pounds of beets did you harvest? And unless you have a way of tallying that in real time, and then again, in the wintertime, or you compile it and you get a number. So for us, it's a spreadsheet. So we just go beets, sum, and it gives you a number. Okay, and here's the hard question. Where did all those beets go? Now you need to be able to show that they've flowed through the organic system and have left the farm. And the secret number that they're looking for, they want to see that final number needs to be about 5%. They might flex it up to 10%, but that means that for every 1,000 pounds of potatoes you showed that you harvested, you need to show where 950 pounds went. And the reason for that is they just want to make sure that you're not harvesting 500 pounds and then you're selling 700 pounds. So what are you buying potatoes from someone else? And so this is where the accountability part comes in. So that's the balance exercise, and you will not be able to do that with confidence if you don't have a good, accurate capture of each harvest. And then the traceability exercise is the one where they say, okay, let's see the potato seed come on the farm in the form of an invoice in sufficient quantity to show that it would seed the area that you've said you've seeded on this date, and it just flows through the system. So yeah, those are the hard questions, and they're not that hard if you have good records, and they just get better if you keep at it.
I was just going to say I've done some audits on other farms, and you can see all sorts of records. Some people have a calendar. Some people have pictures on their phone documenting what they did. Some people keep a journal. So it's basically, as long as you try to keep a record of what you're doing, you know, it doesn't always have to be a spreadsheet, but if it works for the farm and you can show it works, and it works.
Great. All right, we're going to move on to seeds. Kim had a question, which actually was already our predetermined question. So we're going to ask you guys about your seeds. Are you keeping your own seeds? If you buy them, where do you source them? I guess, how easy is it to find organic seeds? Do you often have to make those seed affidavits? Yeah, just talk about seeds.
We don't keep any seed on our farm. We buy seed because we're not seed plant breeders, and there's other people that do a much better job than us. We use yeah, we buy organic seeds whenever possible, and we are happy to pay more, even if we could get the same variety elsewhere for cheaper. We just pay more money for the organic option. You know, part of this stipulation in the standards is that, you know, by forcing us that are seeking certification to support the other side of the industry, which is are the vendors of these organic inputs, the more that we support them, the more that side of the industry grows, and the more availability we'll soon see on the input side. And so for that reason, I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that as time passes, there will be less and less tolerance, because there'll be less and less excuse to not be able to use organic seed. But, you know, we use West Coast Seeds, William Dam, and Johnny's for our vegetables, but yeah, I'm owing.
Saving seed is a great option. Again, I save potato seed. We buy new varieties to keep the disease down. So we keep it for 3 years, and we buy new seed, and pretty tough to get a volume of organic seed. So, and same with on the grain side, we'll keep some oats and stuff in the bin, or peas in the bin as seed source, so we don't have to buy seed.
I think that covers it.
All right.
Can I add something quickly in there? Brandon just kind of clicked it in on my head. Something to cover on this commercial availability. The standard, when it was updated in 2015, actually made a point to add to the definition of commercial availability that cost could not be a factor. So they were finding a lot of issues with producers just trying to get around to keep their input costs low. So they were trying to deal with that a little bit better, and they removed that option. So just keep that in mind when you're doing a seed search. Cost can't be a reason.
All right, thanks for that. Chad is asking about manure, and this was kind of touched on already. Manure or compost, does it need to be certified? And I guess that's different if you're making your own. Brendan, you touched on the degrees and on all of that. And when you're making your own compost, are the materials inputs that are not allowed? So I've got a kind of multi-pronged question around manure and compost.
So we keep a small herd of cattle. We got a head, and this is the one enterprise I don't run the numbers on, because I don't want to know that we lose money on raising beef. But we keep them because it's a source of fertility. And much like Dennis said, we are able to put aged compost on about a third of our fields each year. So 1 in 3 years. And that certainly, in my mind anyway, is more like inoculating the soil with biology as much as it is about putting any sort of nutrients. But to answer the question, we bed our cows with conventional straw, because that's all that's available in our area. And so if you are using non-organic materials in that compost, it needs to be in the organic system, so your farm, for at least 6 months before being applied to the growing areas. So in our case, we compost our cattle manure for 24 months, so we're well beyond that. But and then if you were to buy in compost from somewhere else, if they are a certified organic operation, and it's coming through their certified organic system, then it can come right onto your farm and be applied that day. But if they are not, then it needs to stay on your farm and be in your system for 6 months, heaped or managed in some way before it goes to your fields. And if I say anything wrong, then Catherine's going to catch me, or Dennis.
I did catch you. I'm sorry.
That's good.
The 6-month rule is really more of you're composting it to avoid the 90-day and 120-day rule. And it really doesn't have to be 6 months. It's just that you have to be able to compost it properly, which, based on what you described, Brandon, you did an excellent job of composting, which is nice to hear, because we don't see that a lot. We guys see a lot of composted, which is actually aged manure, and then it falls under the raw manure category. and it has to be applied 90 days before harvest for crops, edible crops that don't touch the soil, 120 days before harvest for edible crops that do touch the soil. Feed crops are exempted from that. And the standards are wrote with the exemption clause. They use on-farm manure sources first. If you can source, then if you have to go off-farm, organic. If you can't get off-farm organic, then you go to non-organic off-farm, but it has to be from a source that you can get a welfare statement from that demonstrates they can turn 360 degrees and they're not left permanently in the dark. So that eliminates any really tight feedlots, dairy operations or installs all the time, sow barns and layer barns and cages, and really tight broiler barns. You don't have to wait 6 months to apply that.
All right. Dennis or Justin, anything else on manure or compost that you guys are using or doing? Leave it. All right. Jonathan's wondering, if I use plastic mulch, does that mean I have to have 3 years without it before going organic?
You can use plastic mulch as long as you remove it. There can't be plastic left in the fields. So if it's use it, remove it. If the biodegradable, though, that's a different subject. That means it's in the soil, and that one might be a flag to deal with. I'll let Carolyn say that one.
All right.
I'm pulling up the section of the PSL for that one. Just to cover, the plastic has to be PVC free, and the biodegradable, I believe, cannot be left in the field. Sorry, I'm trying to get to that section on the permitted substance list. Non-biodegradable and semi-biodegradable materials shall not be incorporated into the soil or left in the fields, and just says no PVC. So that's your restriction.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, Jonathan just clarified biodegradable. All right, so good, got that. So we're going to move on to irrigation. How is, if it is, irrigation water monitored, managed, tested, regulated for plant safety and environmental health?
I think the answer is it's not. So irrigation water, certainly, I mean, I don't know. I think that if your inspector saw you irrigating from a scuzzy pond and irrigating your lettuce crop, they might have some words, but I don't think that there ever was a stipulation on the irrigation water. The wash water, if you're doing any sort of processing, you have to provide a sample, a recent sample, to show that it is not contaminated. Or you could just forego that and put in a purification system, and then that would be sufficient. But I actually think that just even last year, you no longer even have to show a sample for your wash water. So maybe this has changed, and unless the other gentlemen have something to add, maybe we'll just ask Catherine.
I just, the one thing that with irrigation, if you are growing microgreens, then you have to use municipal tap water, or you have to have your waters tested. Otherwise, yeah, you're good. I think this is an interesting question, because I actually get this from customers every once in a while. In fact, one of my best customers is a 7,000 acre conventional grain pulse oil farmer, and asked if I used river water for my irrigation, and was concerned by that because they said the river's full of Roundup, which was interesting. And I get that. And so this has always been a sticking point with me. If I had other customers ask what's concerned about the river water being used for irrigation. And I think that, you know, there's a fine line here, because if we stop using the rivers, then they do actually just become these wastelands that we no longer take care of because they're not fit for irrigation or something like that. You know, I just read a story in the National Observer last year about how there's certain farms in California that are looking at chlorinating their irrigation water so that they can satisfy certain export markets, because their water is contaminated by CFAO farms nearby. And I see that, like, that's not really the solution. Is not adjusting the water. The solution is adjusting the surrounding environment. But I think it's an interesting question because it points at that direction.
I'm going to jump in and actually just cover that there was an update in the standard to account for irrigation, and the irrigation water does have to be monitored to ensure there's no contamination risk. So it really does, it's open-ended in the sense it depends your source. So like a lot of our clients are BC farms because they're food safety audited as well. They have to be audited they have to actually test beginning of season, middle of season, end of season for potability. So they actually have coliform water tests. We have clients in areas that have irrigation that is actually water that gets treated for algicide. So they actually have to have production. They have to have a procedure in place to demonstrate what practice they are having in place to show that they're preventing contaminants from entering the operation, and they have to have the supporting records. So we have to see their logs showing when treatment was actually applied to the water source and what days they watered to ensure that that procedure is actually followed to ensure that all the contaminants are through and past their operation before they start pulling from that irrigation source. So it really does depend. And for Justin, just to add your argument, it was a really depressing thing I had pointed out at inspection. Apparently you can test for Roundup in rainwater. So you're going to get it on your field no matter what, unfortunately.
All right, well, on that depressing note, similar to our seeds, I should have asked this at that time. We actually had a couple of questions about bulbs. Are conventional bulbs allowed within organic? I'm assuming that might be similar to other seeds. And then they were wondering about, is there research regarding potential fungicide residue remaining in the soils where bulbs were previously grown? I don't know if anyone knows that.
Well, with the fungicide, I would think you would have to know what type of fungicide to understand, like what its half-life was, and what the lingering effects would be. So that one would be hard to answer, I think. Bulbs specifically, I'm not entirely sure, but I do strawberries or fruit trees and things like that that aren't grown that we can't source organically. And then that's, of course, the standard for that is that they're not harvestable for a year, right? So they have to be on our land for a year until we can harvest them. So when it comes to bulbs, like things like, I don't know if you're interested in certifying tulips or what exactly, I actually would like to hear Catherine's point on that. I'm not sure what that is.
So all the tubers, bulbs, seeds, they all fall under the same category for 5.3 organic first. If you can't get it, you do the seed search. The 12 months rule for the perennial stock is only for perennial seedlings and things. So if they cannot get it untreated, which a lot of the times there's a risk because it is shipping through multiple provinces, typically those routes, they'll have to be, as Justin said, managed for 12 months on their operation before it can be harvested and marketed as organic. But otherwise the bulbs, if they're annuals, will fall under the same category as the seeds themselves and potato crop, where you have to do a search and demonstrate it's an untreated source to get it in the ground with no problems.
Okay, all right. We have a couple of more questions or back to our irrigation topic. For drip irrigation pumped from the river, Christina just wanted clarification that would need to be tested?
Not necessarily if it doesn't look like it's a high contamination area. Like for example, when I've gone out to some of the other farms and they are pumping for irrigation from the river, if they're not very close to any conventional operations that look like they would be quite close to dripping down into water, then the runoff issues, then we are less worried about it. I mean, unfortunately, you can't control there's no way you're going to get river water to be meet coliform levels. So it hits kind of a point where you have to be realistic in the resources. It's a better option than, say, pulling water source from, say, the slough by your neighbor where they've just sprayed a bunch and you can see the green algae on the side of it. Like, it's kind of just a judgment call by the inspectors when they're out there.
Okay, and Ryan is also wondering on this topic. He's beside the river that floods and wants to know, is spring melt overland flooding regulated by a waiting period for harvest or some sort of testing?
No, so that one is one of those things too, where it's a judgment on your operation. You have to do your best to ensure there's minimal contamination to your operation. So if you have specific runs that run to your through your operation that have a high risk of residue coming off of your neighbor's fields, you shouldn't be farming through those. Those we typically recommend that you seed them to permanent grass and then just farm beside them. So really it's going to depend what's happening on your neighbor's field when it's coming through your field. Like if you know that you're going to get regular runoff with crop prohibited substances on that field, I wouldn't even recommend putting it into certification because your finished products are getting tested a lot of times when they're going into export. And that is most likely going to be resulting in your product testing positive and being rejected.
All right. Christelle is wondering, for things like raspberries, if you are newly certifying and you already have the plants, can you keep the plants and wait out the time required following all the regulations?
Absolutely.
Cool. Easy. All right. We had a couple more questions on my previous list. What are the comparative pros and cons between third-party certification? We're getting into philosophy now. Third-party certification versus emerging peer-reviewed models. Who wants to tackle that? Seems like a Justin question.
Yeah, I like this question. I'm up for it. I think that's an interesting question. I think one of the things like I kind of see in this question is that I kind of bristled against actually certifying in the beginning. I'm not naturally inclined to subscribe to a paperwork and interviews and inspections. So I actually did it because I was frustrated at what I saw as the great lengths I went to being the equivalent of what I saw as shortcuts in other operations under the spray-free banner, but of course I'm much more humble and less competitive at this point in my career. I like I'm thinking they're referring to something like naturally certified grown, which is peer-to-peer working together on and based on the organic standards. And I think that for direct marketers in a really, really tight-knit group with a tight-knit group of eaters, that's a really great option. And if people are keen to do that, I think that's awesome as long as it's in solidarity with the organic movement. Because I think that a lot of people, there's a misinterpretation that certified organics does a lot of work and it's expensive. But I think people aren't seeing the amount of work that's saved for the farmer, in the sense that when it comes to education or consumer awareness, or when it comes to making the standards or investigating products, or there's a lot of work that you don't have to do because it's already done. And it's actually quite a small fee when you think about all the research and policy advocating for policy on the wider scope and everything like that. I think there's a lot of stuff that's not accounted for that's happening in the organic movement that the peer-to-peers are. It looks tempting as in a cost saving, but I don't actually think you're saving that much money because in the end, those peer-to-peer groups are typically based off the organic standards in the end. But that being said, I think they make a really interesting alternative model in solidarity with the organic movement, that's perhaps even a really great incubating space for people who may want to have the wider recognized label of certified organic if they decide to expand or whatnot.
I was just going to add in certified organic. The label has a really high trust level among consumers. And that was really hard work for, and it's so easily eroded. One false claim, one bad apple, so to speak, comes in, it can actually really almost destroy it. So it's something that I think whoever invented this did a really good job, and I think we should try to maintain it. I think it would be beneficial for all farmers and the consumer.
All right. If anyone else wants to weigh in, go for it later. We will have that. Chad's just wondering, what's the total annual cost to be certified, and do the first 3 years cost more?
There we go. I was having a mute issue. I'm assuming that's a question for me. You actually don't have to be under your certifier until your final transition year. So that's a nice change from back like 14 years ago. You had to pay to do all 3 years under your certifier, which was very costly to have to do that and not getting premiums. So you're only doing your final transition year. So it actually probably sounds mean, but if you call the office and you're saying you're 24 months, like just at the beginning of, I guess, beginning of your second year, and you still are not quite at your 24 months until the next year, we'll actually tell you, we'll talk to you, help you, but we actually tell you not to put your application until you're in your last 24 months, so that you're only paying for 1 year with no premium with us. Your cost is going to depend how many acres you're putting in as well. Of course, we just changed our fee schedule and I can't remember it right now. I wish I remember right now. Anyway, so you have every certifying body is slightly different, but we're close to the same fees. We have a base fee, and then we have an acreage fee for ours. We have a base fee for under 10 acres, and then we have a base fee for over 10 acres, and then it's $1 per acre over that. If you say have 5 fields you want to put in, I would say only put 1 in your first year to keep that cost a lot lower, so that you're only looking at maybe spending $600 to $700 as opposed to close to $1,000. Those fees will include your inspector's time, the office time, your travel costs. Average, again, inspections I see rate for small operations can be just around $500 to $600. Upwards to $1,500, $3,000, depending how many acres you are. The acres really do make or break how much you're spending, but also an operator that's paying 3,000 acres, the inspectors are spending 8 hours on your operation. So there's a reason why you're paying for that. So I would say for a small operator, especially the vegetable guys, you're looking at $500 to $600 maybe a year. And then, of course, a lot of certifying bodies have promotional programs going right now for the first year. So like, you're always welcome to contact the offices to see what they're offering.
All right. If anyone else wants to jump in on extra cost, but I think that was pretty straightforward. We had a question about what about a mentorship model for new people entering into organics? Is there a mentorship model, and could it help people with like navigating the paperwork and all the processes? And I guess for me, from the Manitoba Organic Alliance, I can say there currently does not exist one, but it would be if someone contacted us with asking for that, we would try and hook you up with someone with experience. But I was wondering if you guys had any mentors when you got into the business in organics, or how did you navigate the first couple of years, especially transitioning?
I had a mentor. I worked at a farm that was organic, and I actually did their organic. So I was mentored in. I seen all the holes, and I seen how to do it. And then I got a friend that's in Alberta or BC, and I'm trying to coach him through it too, because it is a bit of a road, and learning all this stuff with somebody's guidance is way better than, stumbling through it yourself.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no mentorship program that I'm aware of anywhere. I know that in Ontario here, excuse me, the Organic Council of Ontario, which does a lot of, is basically an organic commodity lobby group, and do a lot of work that Justin kind of mentioned that we all benefit from. They're looking at doing this. They're looking at making a program to help conventional producers transition, and then also to provide some mentorship. But for us on our farm, I think that we made some good connections and gained a lot of knowledge by attending the Moses Organic Conference, which is in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And even though it's in the U.S., it's right in the heart of the Midwest. It's the world's largest organic conference, and it is fabulous. There's like 3,500 people that attend, and everything from like very large organic cash croppers to dairy operators to the 1 acre market gardeners. And when you go to a conference like that, you're going to make connections and go to a lot of great workshops. And, you know, I don't think that in Canada we have any conference that is anywhere close to the quality. So that for us was really great. And, you know, funny enough, even though it's in Wisconsin, our climate here in Thunder Bay, just, you know, we're 800 kilometers east of Winnipeg. We're pretty much the same. We're pretty close. And I think you guys are too. So we have a lot more in common with our colleagues in the Midwest than we do in Southern Ontario. And we have more in common with you folks.
Yeah, and I think EFAO also from Ontario has a mentorship program that they're running, because I actually got contacted about them from a Northwest Ontario farmer who's also interested in getting a mentor. And so there will be some cross-pollination, I think, between us. We're going to have to keep in touch about trying to see what we can do about a mentorship program. But I would say if anyone is interested in getting a mentor, contact Manitoba Organic Alliance, and we'll try and find you someone to help you throughout the way. Or, I mean, you guys have this wonderful group with these wonderful panel members with lots of experience that I'm sure wouldn't mind being a little bit harassed. But we'll let us know if you're interested in that as well. We had one last question about whether or not, Catherine, do we get a free pair of Birkenstocks with certification?
I would just like to know where that question came from. I admit I had to Google what a Birkenstock was. I didn't even know. So the answer, unfortunately, would be no.
Yes. Well, that's, yeah, organic farmers have the reputation of walking around in Birkenstocks, right? Isn't that the thing?
It's funny. I've never seen it. I think one operation.
Oh, that's fun. All right, does anyone else have any last questions? We're actually getting really close to 8:30, which we said was going to be wrap up time. So any more questions? All right, well, so I'm going to leave it to the panel. Do you guys have anything else? Is there anything we didn't cover that you think would be great to add for a organic veggie 101 course?
I think my closing argument, you know, is that the benefits of certifying your products, it goes far beyond trying to capture a premium in the marketplace. I think that it shows leadership among your colleagues around you. I think that, you know, it's the right thing to do in terms of affecting positive change in our food system that we all know is very broken. And you know, organic food is the most regulated food in our country by virtue of the multi-layers of, you know, right from CFIA down to little old dirt farmer. And with that regulation comes assurance for consumers, both bulk purchasers and, you know, consumers alike. There's an assurance about that product that extends beyond just the organic production practices on that particular farm. And so I think there's lots of great philosophical reasons why certifying is the right move. If you're already kind of walking down that road, then keep walking down that road, and hopefully you can bring others with you.
I was just going to mention organic farmers are some of the best or the nicest people I've ever met is in regard to sharing information. I've been potato farms in Montana, farms in Saskatchewan, and you talk about a problem and say you have a problem. They're just so willing to share information. And I hope that's still true, that as farmers, we can help other farmers out. And organic farmers, the natural role seems to be they're not secret keepers. They're not trying to die with a secret. I got a cure to this problem, and they're going to keep it. They like to share things. So I would encourage people just to talk and share.
I think that's a great ending. So I'm not going to.
I was just going to quickly say that if there are people who are thinking about it and you still have lots of questions, bug the certifying bodies. That's what we're here for, whether it be ProCert, EcoCert, OPAM, there's OCIA, TCO. There's lots of us out there. Feel free to bug us even while you're still in the early transitional periods and thinking about it and have lots of questions. Just bug us. That's our job. It's not just to get you through the certification process. It's there to answer your questions as you're starting up as well.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to while you were saying, Dennis, that there's some great organic farmers, I'm just going to plug the Prairie Organic Conference. I know you guys, there's a direct farm conference right now. Next week, the 8th and 9th, there's a Prairie Organic Conference. We've got a great speaker lineup with a few soil health, water management, designing resilient farms. So we've got some cool stuff happening there as well. If you can handle any more Zooming next week, feel free to join us and meet some other fantastic organic farmers there. I'm just seeing, we're going to skip the outro slides, but I'm because just messaging with Christy, trying to read two things at once. So thank you everyone for coming. This has been fantastic. It's been really nice to see all your faces and names that I'm seeing, and working with Direct Farm Manitoba. I'm really hoping that we can do this again in the future, because this has been great. Thanks to everyone. And again, if you have any questions at the end, please feel free to contact Catherine or Christy or myself, and we'd love to chat with you some more. All right, so have a good rest of the very cold evening we have in store for us.